It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, sponsored by Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia, Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the companies, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. Now, here are your hosts.
All right, good afternoon from beautiful Savannah, Georgia. This is Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting from the World Trade Center and the Savannah Economic Development Authority. Thanks to our good friend Bill Stankiewicz. So, right, Bill, how you doing?
Thank you, and thank you to Tripp, the president for CETA, for letting us use his fantastic facility with this beautiful view of downtown Savannah.
Absolutely, and thanks for your help, Bill. But big welcome to our listeners. Glad to have you with us on the show today. Again, we're pleased to be spending the whole day. This is the third segment down in one of the leading logistics hubs in the entire world here, Savannah. Quick note for our listeners: if you're catching this podcast on a replay and you want to listen live next time, go to supplychainnowradio.com. We've got a big red button up at the top. Click on that, follow the instructions, and we'll get you plugged in live to Supply Chain Now Radio and all the things that we're up to. All right, so let's say good afternoon to our guests here today. I'm pleased again to have Bill Stankiewicz serve as my co-host. Good afternoon again, Bill.
Hello. Good to see you, Scott, and Ramsey Khalidi.
That's right. And in this segment, as Bill just mentioned, we're pleased to feature Mr. Ramsey Khalidi as our special guest. Ramsey serves as president of Southern Pine Company of Georgia. Good afternoon, Ramsey.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Glad to have you with us here today.
I'm very glad to be here. Bill is an old friend of mine, and I'm glad to meet you right now.
Well, any friend of Bill's is a friend of mine, and Bill's good people. And
likewise.
Thank you.
He rubs elbows all the time with good people, so glad you're here.
It's good to be seen.
Birds of a feather.
So we've got a great conversation teed up, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we get started, let's thank our sponsors and our hosts. Once again, Supply Chain Now Radio programming is brought to you by Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Today, again, we're hosted by the World Trade Center right here in Savannah, along with the Savannah Economic Development Authority, and also Apex Savannah, which is a new nonprofit that serves and makes supply chain happen down here in the greater Savannah area. And, of course, our co-host, big friend of the show, Bill Stankiewicz. Bill, who's involved in literally every single thing that's going on in this market. Bill's got a finger or a toe or maybe
try.
a ear.
Count on it.
Here to create jobs for all of Georgia.
That's right. And on that note, to our listeners, Bill is a supply chain guru and consultant based right here in Savannah. And Bill, you're also on a variety of boards, but you're on VP of Finance on the Apex Savannah board. You're on the Technology Task Force, where we talked about that first thing this morning.
Yes, sir.
You lead the local chapter of the Georgia Manufacturing Alliance. You name it. And Bill's a wonderful connector. Great person to have in your network, and it's a pleasure to co-host our third segment here today on Supply Chain Now Radio.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with such top executives like you, Scott, and Mr. Ramsey.
Absolutely. Well, we couldn't do it without you.
Too much credit, but go ahead.
Okay, so as I mentioned, our featured guest today on this segment of Supply Chain Now Radio is Mr. Ramsey Khalidi, president of Southern Pine Company of Georgia. Good afternoon again, Ramsey. Hope you enjoyed a great Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. Right. Always in the middle of the week, right when you want to break up your supply chain. But go ahead.
Well, did you go anywhere exciting and do anything?
No, we stayed in Savannah.
Yeah?
It was great. My father's here now, and we just really enjoyed the city.
Awesome. Who does the cooking?
Actually, I do a little bit of it. And Whole Foods did a little bit of it.
Oh, I love Whole Foods. I call it whole paycheck.
And of course, Babe's Barbecue in Garden City.
Oh, that's delicious.
Have you been there yet?
I have not.
Oh, we're going to go together. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you had a good time reconnecting with family.
Absolutely.
Too. Good food.
Hope
good
y'all
family.
had a good time too.
It was a fantastic time. So, first off, let's talk about. Tell us about yourself. Right, the proverbial question there. How long have you called Savannah home?
Well, I started counting this morning, and it's almost 40.
Wow.
Basically over half my life.
So you certainly get the native badge, maybe a couple native badges for
I think
4
so.
decades.
2 daughters born here.
Awesome.
And but yeah, 1979.
And you're talking about the two daughters. One is a senior at UGA.
That she is.
And the other was just accepted into at University of Alabama,
Don't say
right? Sorry.
But listen, she's still working on it.
Well, you got to be
We're
proud,
good.
I'm sure.
Absolutely. No doubt.
These
Both
days,
great.
it's tough to get in these universities. I was taught, so we live pretty close to UGA, and it leads to a lot of conversations about, friends of mine that have sons and daughters college application age, and some of the statistics are mind-boggling.
Oh, it is. It is. Yeah, there's the highest GPA and all the testing to get in, the ACT and so forth. Have never, and every year it actually clicks up higher.
Wow. Well, we've got 3 kids at home, 9, 7, and 6, and fortunately they're very smart like their mother. So
yes, that's what I say. Count on that one.
All right, so you've been here 40 years, Ramsey. Before we get to some of your passions, I gathered you're an industrial engineer by education, but you also worked at General Motors earlier years ago.
I did.
And that was at least 40 years ago, back when Detroit was, even though it's on a resurgence, it was a more of the Detroit that many of us grew up with, right?
It's unbelievable.
Of industrial manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, all that stuff. What was it like to work at GM at that time?
Just to be in the state of Michigan at the time was fantastic. I started in the small plants. My uncle had a plastics plant, and he was supplying all the parts plants that supplied all the assembly plants.
Wow.
And so I got an early sort of education out of the classroom. When at the age of 16, I would go down to Detroit. We were living in East Lansing. And I caught the bug, as far as manufacturing and building and seeing everybody having a place, whether you're unskilled all the way through, you could get jobs. They were building the city. They were very sensitive to the existing structures. And there was some demolition going on, but for the most part, they were strategically placed, and all the plants from Ohio all the way to Illinois, steel, glass, all of it, all came together. It seemed to have a real network of connectivity. And so they started building the roads. They moved a little bit outside and out of the urban core, but they continued to develop. There were neighborhoods. There were Polish neighborhoods like Hamtramck. There was the Eastern Market. So you had cultural diversity, but yet everybody pulled in the same direction. So, yeah, that was when we were, and I saw that start to diminish a little bit in 1977, 78. But up to that point, it was all exponentially growing.
So a big theme of our show today is going to be sustainability and recycling. You mentioned your uncle had a plastics manufacturing operation.
He did, actually. He was the inventor of the beanbag chair, which was from industrial drops. He ground up he had an industrial plant that made these foam boxes, if you will, styrofoam boxes that put, say, windshield wiper motors in a tray and palletized them and wrapped them and shrunk wrapped them and critical path them, because the assembly plants had no area to store. So they were essentially, everything came in right on time. So I don't know if it was on-time warehousing or whether, I don't know that the buzzwords were even there at the time.
Probably
just in time.
Yeah.
But they were doing it. The market was just, market driven. So those parts, then what do we do with these trays that they were reused to a certain amount of times until they kind of broke or whatever. Also, all the drops from vinyl seating and so forth, where they would make the chairs, car chairs and the vinyl roofs and so forth. So that became 2 products that had really nowhere to go except a landfill, the odd shapes, hence the beanbag chair.
Wow.
So there are a lot of products that are around today that came from, post-industrial waste.
Right.
What's sitting on the loading dock? Let's look at it. And now there's obviously sustainable design is in its own right a thing to be, and what business or what anything can't use is more sustainably designed operations.
Absolutely. Speaking of beanbags, a couple of years ago, my wife's Christmas gift was the largest beanbag on the market. It took up half the den. And it's now up in the kids' room. I'm not sure. I think they're hiding toys and snacks. So it's when we come up there from the parents. But I wonder, I didn't make that connection. That wasn't in my pre-show notes that your family was connected to the first ever, the inventor of the beanbag.
He was. He did a lot of things. He was an electrical engineer, and so at Martin Electric, and so they perfected the spot weld. They did a lot of things, but he always had a desire to be his own manufacturer, and so a lot of professionals and engineers did that in those days. Right. They got together and formed stamping plants because there was a lot of need for almost like a super sub, if you will, like in today's world when you've got these huge $4 and $5 billion a year contractors. So they'll bring in somebody that's sort of turnkey in certain things. Well, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, always could take a product, and if it met the standards, bring that in and not have to set up a special line just for those particular pieces to that car. But think of all that engineering. Imagine something that would come together, whatever, a Ford Mustang, a Camaro, in the late 60s and have such a perfectly matched car. I had a cousin, actually, who made models for fenders. Everything that you see in a car was initially made out of wood.
Really? Now, I think I saw that.
Pattern makers.
Yes, that's right. Well, moving from Detroit and all the really cool things that's been going over there for the last couple hundred years, down to Savannah, where we've spent the last 4 decades, and doing our pre-show homework and really picking Bill's brain on a lot about you, Ramsey. You are. I think Bill mentioned as you came in, you are a little bit of a legend here. Moving mountains and homes and neighborhoods and one of my things, we talked about this in the warm up prior to going live, is protecting these historic buildings that have such a neat architecture and are such a they present so much historic value to the
preservation.
Yes, preservation.
Unbelievable. Wonderful job.
And as you mentioned, Ramsey, there's no need to tear everything down and burn everything down to the ground and build up everything. Start over anew. There's so much neat character and integrity and history in a lot of these buildings
Tremendous.
Around us, right?
It's absolutely that actually converted. The interesting thing about developing real estate, when you can see that, as you say, repurposing or carving out more economic opportunity within the urban core. It really, and you continue to redensify. That was one of the fallbacks that Detroit did, was they were demolishing so much. And so a lot of other than the very downtown part of Detroit and Chicago, that happened a little bit. Atlanta, we've lost some buildings. But I think, as Jane Jacobs would always say, you're repurposing, and the most well-laid brick is the one that's still in that wall. So even if you have got ruins left over or whatever, you're repatriating, and the history is a big part of it. We still get people walking into some of the older buildings downtown and saying, my mother worked here, my grandmother worked here, oh my God, can I walk through here? And they'll be in tears that building is still there. And that's a pretty broad stroke, but it's for residential, commercial, like Broughton Street, if you will. The thing about Sears, I was through there last week, and it was very, very hard to see that. Because they were the first to do mail order, weren't they? There were so many things that they
Sears and Montgomery Wards, those two.
And Montgomery Wards, from houses to jeans, whatever, paint. So when you see that, I think that's a backward step.
Yeah.
So you're right. And when you have the history and then the economy of being able to be on a bus line or not everybody having a car, because urban sprawl has really done a lot. And so if you look at the environment, that marriage, and back to supply chain, if you will, it really has to be, everything should be a closed loop. I think when you close a loop, we did a couple of buildings downtown as contractors. So we would deconstruct, say, the roof and the floors that the engineers had to replace with steel. Those got rolled right back into the project in the form of furniture and all the flooring and trim and doors
all reused,
and such.
100%.
Everything's all repurposed.
No landfill. Which is nice.
Not at all. There's certain amounts of biomass that should go to landfill, but as you know, in Greenville, BMW is running completely off landfill, off the gas.
Right. So clearly, if our listeners cannot pick it up, there's a ton of passion around preservation and sustainability and recycling. And what did you just say? Everything needs to be a closed loop. That's That's a great T-shirt. That's a great.
Well, yeah, or an ecosystem,
Yeah.
a complete ecosystem. When it goes like, there's a company locally called Dirt Environmental, which manufacture.
My friend Laura Lee Bouquet.
Laura Lee,
Yeah,
absolutely,
great person.
So they basically their waste stream. There isn't one. I mean, they really repurpose everything back into it, and that's at a high end. It's a very high end product that they put out. So really, it's inspirational, and I think more companies, even Walmart, looked into changing their lighting. Going to different forms of lighting and figuring out heights and intensities and so forth. So anybody can economize and do better for the environment all at the same time.
So where does this passion stem from? We can go. There's lots of different stories of efforts you've been a part of here in Savannah and led in the name of preservation and preserving the history and structures and really educating developers and local community and all the different shareholders that there really is no need to raise things, destroy to rebuild, right?
Absolutely.
Where does this passion come from?
To improve. I think it started when I bought my first house. I was 21 years old, and I moved it. In fact, it was in the middle of Detroit, and we put it on a trailer, I guess, and moved it to some place that I could save that structure and not have it be crushed, not have it go by the way of a few dump trucks and a few brick. The biggest thing that I've noticed is job training, and bringing people into the fold and creating jobs that weren't there. New jobs. It's a frontier, and there's all kinds of buzzwords: upcycling, recycling, etc. But sustainably designed from properly sourced materials is always a positive. So there isn't a single company. One of the things we did all the way back to 1967 was to recycle, before the beanbag chair was the next year, was the ground materials. How much of that can go back into a virgin bead? We were saving petroleum. I clearly remember the oil embargo of 1973. And you really could see that there is a definitive end to this. I mean, really, it's out there on the horizon. I worked at a foundry, so I had several jobs. I was working as a plant engineer for a foundry in Lake Orion, Michigan. And every morning I would go in, and we had blast furnaces. The guy that I worked for. And
to our listeners, if you've never been into a foundry, I've been into one up in Rome, Georgia.
Oh, boy.
Or maybe Cartersville. I can't remember the name of it. But when you come out, you want to smoke a Marlboro Red and crack a full lead of Budweiser. I mean, it is a lot of heavy duty manufacturing. So how long did you spend in the foundry?
And the stamping plant in the General Motors plant was the same way. It's all emulsed oil that's in the atmosphere. So there's a lot you have to control in the environment. And we've come a long way with that.
Yep.
But so the foundry, I was there 2 years. But one of the the guy that I worked for invented coining. He did some of the first jet engines, and he initially cast the blades. And then his idea was, we didn't have CNC machines back then. Everything was either billet with a machinist or whatever. And you have to have perfect balance for a jet engine. So he invented coining. So he had a stamping plant in a foundry. So when it was molten red, it would stamp, impress into a softer piece, obviously. And it would be magnafluxed and so forth. So we would see, during this oil embargo, I was watching all the blast furnaces. So back to you saw that. Imagine that energy loss. And then every day we would come in and have to melt all the wax. And I thought, wait a minute, let's recapture that. So we created this sort of home-crafted heat exchanger, mounted it on the stack, captured that heat, because the blast furnaces stayed on all night. And that came back down into the plant. We pulled that heat down, and then we got to turn off all the burners for the wax. So I began to see that. So I guess if you want to call it a passion, but that also
is that accurate? It certainly seems like it seems like
haven't had time to check. Almost I'll get with you later on that.
I mean, it really just a little bit I spent with you, and some of the stories I've read about that are out there. Thanks to our friends at Google, it's almost a purpose, and purpose may be a better word than passion. Is that?
Well, I mean, if you can influence, we have programs that interconnect and interface with the neighborhoods that the industrial buildings are in. Again, back to the southern part of Germany where they had all the coal mining and manufactured and electric production. That was very dirty until they really turned all that around and redeveloped. Kind of like the project you brought up earlier in Atlanta that Jamestown is doing at the old Sears building. It was a Sears distribution, 2 million square feet of industrial buildings. So that's all being repurposed. Think of the job creation after the loss. And I think one of the things that Bill was mentioning earlier, maybe it was a couple of days ago, absolutely ancillary to the warehousing needs to be manufacturing. So you need both. And you made me think of something earlier, and I'll tell you that there's a lot of new thoughts, but a supply chain can't have any weak links.
That's right.
You are doing this here. We're all doing our part, and I think there's a lot of people out there with passion. Once you connect, you sort of recognize it. And it's like, well, those innovative ideas need to tie in with these innovative ideas because they can't survive. We can't survive without each other.
Yes, ecosystem.
And you mentioned this company, which I'd like to meet. But one of the thoughts I had, which is completely ancillary as far as transportation, how many trucks are headed home with nothing in the back, no flatbeds and or TEUs or anything? What about some app that out there and there's dispatching all over? But what about pallet collection? What about a number of things that can be remade from pallets, which is a throwaway? Yeah. I mean, it's not going to do your landfill much good. It takes up a lot of space, and it's not a lot of biomass there to actually reproduce,
Some
later
people
on.
build furniture with it, but you need a fairly decent pallet for that.
Well, one of the passions is really almost like desperation. We've got a limited amount of time, and I've spent most of my career on the supply side. And I wish I'd have spent more time on the demand side. I think the world is catching up with, hey, where can I get reclaimed? Why don't we build this building with reclaimed materials?
Right.
Or how much of this property can be done with great old stuff without it being just window dressing? You really want it to be totally and truly green. And so I think that's a lot of the younger folks that are coming up. Can start to take that. I'm looking across the river at the repurposed power plant that Richard Kessler has done. Imagine the projects that group has been involved in. So that's there. I mean, there it is. It was a scrape job. Anybody else would have said, wow, this is Savannah River. We've got 1,000 feet on the river. Wow, can you imagine what kind of density we could get? No, they're repurposing the power plant.
That's good.
And protecting the character.
Absolutely.
That's such
and the coastline. Yeah. Because if you have to get into, digging, and pulling all that out, and then where does it go? And then think of the carbon, just trucking debris out of the downtown.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a lot of different aspects in the sustainability and recycling realm that are part of the end-to-end supply chain, right? No shortage. No shortage. So looking forward in your crystal ball, 2019, maybe 2020, what do you think is next when it comes to companies? Because the consumer demands it. You mentioned a second ago that the world is starting to catch up to the art of the possible, right, as it relates to this, what we're talking about. So the consumer demands it. We're also willing to pay for it now, I think more so than ever before. I remember slightly off topic, but 5 or 6 years ago, I think was about the time frame that Walmart introduced its woven bags. They put it in the front near the entrances, and I'd walk past them and I would tell myself, I've got no interest in paying for the bag. But now, and it's probably a number of different forces of nature that's worked on my mind. Now, I don't like if I forget my paid for bags at the house before I get. A lot of times I'll turn around because I don't want any more plastic bags.
Tybee Island,
straws,
gotten rid of plastics.
Cups.
And more. Kroger's getting away.
So the consumer plastics. Education piece, the mindset, it seems like it's definitely had long started to shift. What do you think on the supply side? What's next? What do you think the industry is going to embrace in a very meaningful, practical manner next?
I mean, that's a perfect metaphor. Is it pay me now or pay me later? So really, and I'd like to see, and I think Savannah is a really great model. Climate change is there. I mean, our president is now basically come around to it. I think that the lawmakers are going to see, okay, the Navy's already been, making provisions in all the ports that they're in. They see it happening. I think part of it is going to be inclusion and coastline development that is going to be sustainable for the next 100 years, because we know what's happening. There's no question. I like to see connectivity. I think the Port Authority is doing a great job of that with the rail and so forth. So I hate to see Savannah flourish and Macon not, or whatever.
Right.
So why not connect inland? I think that's a really big thing, and do it with a low carbon footprint.
Are you referring to the inland ports?
Yes.
Okay.
As a start, they've done that as a start, but it can be done privately as well.
Yeah.
People that are they're saying, well, we'd like to bring our freight into the Savannah Harbor. Well, there'll be a critical path at some point where you won't be able to handle the traffic. So we want to kind of preempt that and figure out. So I think transportation, getting in on a train. I know that I heard this. I don't know this firsthand. That they're already.
We'll have our team verify it.
Okay.
We're still in the air. So
We'll count some trucks.
Okay. Well. As far as rail going or high-speed rail going from Macon to Atlanta. So the next step, and I know during Jimmy Carter's administration they did I-16, and that was incredible. And it was, and really now, how many years has that been? Is now showing, producing fruit.
Right.
So you really want to see the opportunity and job creation across the board. Warehousing here and warehousing 30 miles in is half the price. Create economic opportunity from this engine to other parts, and so connect Charleston, Brunswick, which obviously needs some more economic development, on down. So I see it in the development world, and I see it from manufacturing.
And what I'm hearing you really speak to is from a strategic planning standpoint, right? And going broader than just Savannah, but the larger ecosystem that's out there. So, and we all know, whether it's supply chain or whether it's geographically speaking, or whatever, every decision made upstream has lots of different repercussions downstream, and vice versa.
Does it?
Yeah. So being able to more holistically plan in industry, supply chain, manufacturing, transportation, obviously with the ports, inland ports and stuff. You think that's going to be even a bigger trend in the years to come?
Well, we've got that opportunity. I think we saw the industrialists come down here and do the paper plants and so forth on the river. I mean, that was an early trend because the North was glutted. I mean, it really was. And so it was so focused in the 3 or 4 states, in that Rust Belt, if you call it. A lot of people, I work with people from Kentucky. I worked with people when I was at General Motors all over the country. Everybody was gravitating that way. Then they started, obviously Birmingham began with the steel mills and so forth. But I think we probably would have been more sustainable. And the second time around now, if we spread that out, we're going to have a stronger, more diverse footprint. And you're going to be able to have, on the design build side, it's going to be beneficial instead of feast or famine, which I don't want to see again. I already did it once in my life, and
never.
But I'm glad. I was born in the South. I was my dad's first job, offshore oil rigs. He was a geologist, and he went to Michigan State, and so we were born in Louisiana, lived in the Middle East as children, moved back to Michigan, and then I was able to. So it reminded me of New Orleans and Houma. But I saw the opportunity. That's really what drives. If there's a passion, the potential. Instead of a decaying power plant, where else are you going to see that? That's probably one of the most significant, really, developments on the East Coast. Show me a bigger, better one, and then all around it as well. So when I see the city starting to respond to that kind of development. They've never had a $180 million arena to think about.
Yeah,
that's
true.
huge.
Unbelievable.
being, in Bridget Liddy's office this morning, she's an urban planner. There, if you go into those offices, you'll see that they're also thinking for the future. So I think it's exciting, but a big, big, big part of it is going to be how are we going to get around where the warehouse is going to be, where the manufacturing jobs going to be.
And the transportation for those people and product.
And it all has to be connected.
Because that's all tied together regarding the skills gap. Because there's a lot of people that have facility jobs in Pooler, and there's unemployment here in Chatham County, but they don't have cars.
Right.
They don't have cars.
Or the training, which we know some professors over that do forklift training.
Oh, that's true. Some really talented people there. Forklift safety.
You're looking at them, by the way. You do that.
That's right. Bill Stankiewicz. That's right. I'm connected with him on social media. I could not. You can't miss it.
Oh,
which I love.
You don't need it.
Well, so to our listeners, we're speaking here with Ramsey Khalidi, president of Southern Pine Company, which is a division of RK Construction and Development. So let's talk about Southern Pine Company. Let's shift gears a little bit, because we could be here probably till Friday talking about this topic, which is
out of time?
An important one. No, that's it.
You got one more hour.
Oh, great.
But let's talk about Southern Pine Company. What does that company do?
Southern Pine Company was a company that was formed, basically the mother of invention. You're developing, you're fixing up houses, if you will. I basically buy fixer uppers, whether it's a shotgun or a 200,000 square foot warehouse. It pretty much is the same formula. You've got an existing infrastructure. You don't need new roads. You don't need new wells. You don't need anything. You're able to redesign off that footprint that was historically there. But there were materials. There were dumpsters being filled. You could see them all around. So I thought, we are not using all the materials that are back to the supply side that this building needs. There's some spare parts. It's like you put something together and you take it apart. It's left over. Where were these from? You have to watch works. So those spare parts can go into other buildings. Southern Pine came from that out of need. And then other builders and other developers who saw the need for flooring and even the components, reclaimed brick, when you knock a building down, because that is a reality. The plan B really is to salvage everything. So deconstruction, I believe deconstruction is going to be part of the supply chain in a big way. I think when Texas Stadium had to come down, I believe during a really bad time, was it 06, 07? I literally woke up in the middle of the night and said, why can't we just deconstruct it? We're putting people back to work. We're going to have, the booty left over, if you will, which are going to be steel beams. And it takes the same trades. So I think that decon, and that's becoming, there's in Chicago, there's an organization, and even in Detroit, where they're starting to think along those lines. Still the supply side and storage. I mean, it's just like mining. I mean, if you had to go cut a tree down, or you could go pick up a beam from a dumpster. I mean, so all of that in an organized fashion could feed the construction side, which is definitely out of control. There's no question, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a great way. There are. Look at home. Is there not a Home Depot in the country that does less than $55 billion a year? There isn't. I mean, it's phenomenal. So imagine if you could go into Home Depot. This is one of my ideas. And you could go to a rack that was all reclaimed 2x4s. So it has to become affordable. It has to be a point where you can get it out there and distribute them in mass, not just, somebody's add-on.
Yeah, there's a... I think it's an offshoot of Habitat. Restore.
Yeah, Restore.
From Restore Centers. Yeah.
Okay.
Goodwill.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're an offshoot of them.
With a lot of goodwill, but with construction supplies
Absolutely.
rather than clothes.
All
kind
architectural.
of the concept you're kind of talking about.
That's totally it.
That's been really neat. We've been in that. We had up in Apex Savannah, Apex Atlanta board, we had a member of the Restore team on the board, and they hosted a couple events, and a very unique, in fact, it was they went into an old strip mall to establish a large warehouse. So they recycled not only all the parts in there, but also the facility they warehouse everything in. So that's pretty cool. All right, so we talked a little about Southern Pine Company and what you do. what's next? I mean, what looking at 2019 for Southern Pine Company. It sounds like not only do you, because you're in an industrial space and a residential space, right? You're not wherever you can find and reuse materials.
You gravitate agnostic towards an endangered building,
right,
typically. So
what do you got planned up, teed up for 2019?
There's several things on the horizon, and it's basically in that sort of sphere of like a perimeter. Like if you go to Atlanta. The Green Line is just incredible. And see, so how did you think anything new the Belt Line. Yeah. Did you think anything new could happen in Atlanta? No, that is. And so now they're taking, and then the rail yards, there's another, what's that called? There's a section of town down there now that there's a name for it.
I got 3 kids. I chase business yards. Or chase kids. That's all
right.
We do.
That's right. But it's something rail yard.
Right.
And so that's right in Midtown.
Right.
So that's kind of what I've got my eye on is that next level where it becomes more mainstream, where you've got and a big one is going to be workforce and affordable housing. That's got to go along with everything we're doing so that you can have that mix close. Yep. And if you've got that mix, you can actually produce more.
So on workforce, closer to the beginning of this segment, you talked about creating jobs. How do you see successful sustainability efforts and recycling efforts creating jobs?
The thing about creating jobs is, and it's a little bit unfortunate, but in a way you always are like happy. We work with a lot of interns. The College of Art and Design has got a couple of great professors that not only are in the neighborhoods, but they're in the neighborhoods, and they interact with for-profit companies. So the idea is that when a small company typically does the training, I went through that same thing, a plastics plant, a foundry, General Motors, right, and every time they're waving goodbye, crying. but this is a supply chain of hands-on experience. They can get along either with or without 2 year. I did pre-engineering for 2 years at a college in Lansing. It was enough for me. Yep. And then I went out into the field and I would have gone on to GM Tech, but we really went into the plants, and it was exciting. So when you take people that are in the high schools now, and I mean they're a lot smarter in 10th grade than I ever was in college, but those opportunities are there, and as you go through, so creating jobs even at a limited amount of skill. Forklift driving, etc. Yeah. All that gets you, then right away if that's your future or not. So yes, I think local, small, and back to local, of course, small companies do that service inadvertently. Yeah. So that is interconnecting with the schools. They don't have shop class anymore like we had. I built a bookcase
Bill's
for my mother.
Bill's got a story for that.
Oh boy, is there something he doesn't have a story for?
We'll have to do that as a sidebar.
Yeah,
but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
In other words, it's I think the job creation and as far as real world experience is a very big part of people moving on into the engineering jobs and the tech jobs of the future.
Like the technical colleges, to add on what
Absolutely.
Ramsey's talking about, HVAC, electrical.
Huge.
And they just continue to draw more and more students. And even if you get a student graduating after 2 years of college, Savannah Technical College, if he's a welder, he or she can be starting at $80,000 a year.
It's
unbelievable.
Right.
With no actual college
and an
debt.
important contribution to what's going on right now, the development.
Yes.
So I'm gonna circle back on the trade shop class, the shop class story.
Oh, the shop class. Well, see, this goes back a few years when I was in Chicago, and I've told this story to Ramsey. I
haven't heard it.
Oh, you haven't? Okay,
I don't think so.
Maybe it was Scott. But anyway. In Kelly High School, they only had shop class and electric shop, so I went to meet the shop class guy, nice guy, and he shook my hand, and he had 2 fingers on each hand. So I ended up taking electric shock. Yeah, I'll go fingers.
That's what OSHA's for.
That was before OSHA.
Well, you are a real professional already then.
Oh boy. Well, so as we wrap up, it's tough to believe we're almost in December of 2018.
No
Gosh, where did the last couple of years go?
I do not know.
Any we didn't talk about this in warm up, but what's the most critical project that you're currently involved in?
It kind of ties in with 2 or 3 different properties, but it's creating affordable manufacturing space.
Wow.
And another one of the new sort of engines that's in Georgia, obviously, is the film industry.
Right.
So follow the market, and creating and developing space, not only affordably, but with sensitivity, and reusing the resources that are already here. And that's a big one. And that's quite a sizable amount of footage. I saw the announcement yesterday. 500,000 more square feet of warehouse space. It's so a lot of that you see, and you really need, and the smaller companies need the same thing so that they can be relevant. So those are the projects that we're on right now, is mostly developing as much space that, and one of the things, and Scott, you reminded me of something. So in 05, 06, it was a tremendous vacuum for people in the real estate development world, which we were. In construction, we started sharing space, and I think that's something you brought up, the project in Atlanta. Sears was a single user in 2 million square feet in just that property. So now the opportunities, I've already got my thoughts on the mall. What can that space be? So redeveloping spaces like that is really going to be, I think, in all our futures. But that's kind of where I'd like to be, and that's. So one user can't occupy. We could not occupy. We had about 400,000 square feet of buildings, cumulatively speaking, and we couldn't afford them. I mean, basically, the income just dropped off, and there was no way. So I think that back to the supply chain and interconnectivity, I learned from that. It was handed to me. I wasn't ready for it. It was, what is this? And then it's always next year and next year. We were in the middle of developing some townhouses on Forsyth Park, and we sold 2, and then we made a little money on 2, and we lost a little money on the other 2, and we broke even. So 2.5 years of my life ended up being flat in those terms. But we learned from that multiple businesses spreads not only the risk for the lenders who are back now, but it also allows these companies. We started doing furniture. We're doing a lot of furniture now, as I showed you. And so you've got other companies. You've got welding companies. You've got millworking companies. You've got all kinds of companies that can kind of come together and share the same space, but not the same ownership.
Right. You've done
so
some
you've got
wonderful
entrepreneurs. A lot of young companies come up, 2 and 3 and 4 people will have an idea. They're not going to get hired anywhere. We certainly weren't hiring. I was lucky to even have a house to go to. It was pretty insane. But we found out that together we were stronger. And it was like, yeah, I've got some space over there. Set up your shop over there and call me in a year if you want to pay rent or not.
I need to find a studio space like that.
Well, that's exactly what it was. And that's how. And then so that I see that's a trend I saw that was basically that we probably should have already been doing that. But so more of that is the future.
Ramsey, talk about some of the furniture that you have repurposed for the restaurant industry, the hotel industry.
They get it. The boutiques now are looking at locally made furniture and products. That's very big now, more so than it was. And so that's also what Savannah, this view we've got. I can actually see,
It's gorgeous.
many of the businesses and so forth that are going into that area and saying, yeah, what have you got that you can make for us? Boardroom tables and so forth.
Whole Foods, if you go into a new Whole Foods store in Savannah, if you see their dining room and that, everything was remanufactured
here with
in
several
Savannah.
companies. Yeah,
Yes.
Wooden
Yeah.
Sheep tied in with us, and there were
Exactly.
several. And there's Gelnick's, which is the cork company from Portugal. So there are a lot of companies coming here, and so I think we're seeing that partnering with them on a product is really the future. It's our strength.
Yep. Oh, going back to the co-locating that you're talking about, it seems like the mindset and the willingness to co-office. What's the
shared space, shared office space?
Yeah, that's
I think
only,
Savannah was one of them.
Yes, I think the mindset of embracing that.
WeWork.
The
They're
WeWork, the
multi-tenant.
Yeah, Atlanta Tech Village, I think it's a neat example. It seems like that mindset, though, is still kind of like going back to the Walmart bags. There hasn't been a demand for this shared space for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
It seems like the willingness to embrace and not have as much privacy and share more of what you're doing is still not new, but in recent years, it's only become more in demand, it seems.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
One of our business developer, Ashley Bowersox, actually did that in Savannah and was very successful, but the idea now, and I think it's not just you're sharing the overhead, which we do in, as far as hands-on, in the machine shops and so forth, but it's also the interconnectivity and the creativity. It's a creative hub. So it does more than just, hey, I've got 1/10 of this electric bill. You can bring in clients. We find that we'll bring in some of even the artists. When somebody will come in and they're developing an idea for a restaurant, we'll have a big design vignette with them, and sort of they'll see. I mean, there's coffee roasting. So how did coffee roasters get downtown and decide to establish themselves there? It's because of the neighborhood,
Right?
And that neighborhood, again, is stronger when it's diverse.
Jobs are created.
Jobs
People
get
don't have to
created.
go far.
They do.
Yeah.
They do get created.
And the fabric of the community gets stronger.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And so you want that to have access to the larger markets. That's actually a big point. Is that I hadn't thought about that, but also the products that we're developing here. I'd like to sell something in Atlanta. I'm not worried about anywhere else. That's where I'd like to sell. How do I do that? How do other people and other startup companies do that? Because part of what you were saying is for startups. They get in, they get an idea, and they've got a couple of years to develop that idea, and off it goes. So that's what's on the horizon.
Yep.
I mean, it's already there.
Yeah.
It really is. You just kind of follow it.
Got to act on the opportunity, right?
Or the gatekeepers, I suppose.
Yeah. So to our listeners, before I forget, to learn more about Southern Pine Company of Georgia, you can check them out at southernpinecompany.com. Any travel teed up, or do you got roots here? You stay here? I know you love Savannah.
I stay. I mean,
where are you going to go?
Where do I want to go?
Do you have a bunch
Except
of
to watch that Georgia game on Saturday.
He's always in that office when I come in with a dozen donuts.
Well, here's
He does.
Then he lets me in.
Here's the toughest question of the day. Then, what? Give us a prediction on the score. And this is the SEC championship, Georgia.
It is. It is. We have every dog has his day, and what day have you not thought about last year?
Well, I'm a Clemson fan. I don't.
Clemson,
Alabama,
you guys
we had
don't.
a
Clemson.
Tough. That was a
My
tough
best
game.
friend Rick Priester went to Clemson. He's dyed in the wool. That's it for life. I know how that works.
But we love Dabo. We love this year's team, and it's neat. We've had a couple challenges on our own, with that new quarterback transfer role. But anyway, nevertheless,
Clemson's always fun. Yeah,
it's we've been spoiled here in recent years. But so UGA's going to pull it off.
of course.
All right, on the record.
Is there any doubt? I don't know.
Ramsey
What was that, 50-40?
It'll be close, but we're ready for that left-handed Hawaiian.
Awesome. All right. Well, Ramsey, it's been a pleasure.
Mine too, Scott.
We
Thank
could
you
talk
so much
for hours a day, but thanks for spending time with us here at Supply Chain Now Radio in our special hashtag Savannah Biz episode. To our listeners, again, that was Ramsey Khalidi, president of Southern Pine Company of Georgia. And Ramsey, before we leave here, the company that you had mentioned that we talked in the warm-up is Rubicon Global. So I want to give a quick shout-out to Rubicon Global from a recycling standpoint.
Wow.
They do a lot of neat work helping companies, from what I understand, helping companies to uncover practical recycling options amongst all the other work they do. So Will Haraway, a good friend of the show and one of our co-hosts for the Supply Chain City version of Supply Chain Now Radio, turned us on to Rubicon in recent months, and really impressive firm. So Rubicon Global, and I think that's Rubicon.com.
Their founders, I think, is Mark Spiegel, Hank Dudgeon, Lane Moore. Those are the founders for Rubicon Global.
And they're probably you went to high school with them, or you know them some way, Bill. I'm sure.
They're a friend of a friend. They're a cloud-based, full-service waste and recycling company focused on sustainability.
There you go.
How can you beat that? I mean, they look at it as an opportunity. Then the feedstock, if you will.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Good stuff.
Great firm. So that concludes this episode. We'll have to send an invoice to Rubicon. A little airways there. No, just kidding. Concludes the episode. Big thanks to my wonderful co-host today once again as we wrap up segment 3 or 4. Bill, is this segment 4? I'm losing count. I need my abacus out.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Bill Stankiewicz and, of course, our host here, the World Trade Center and the Savannah Economic Development Authority. So long from Savannah, Georgia, although we have one more segment to go, but we hope to see our audience next time on Supply Chain Now Radio.